I stared at my phone reading the text message for the third time, while watching my 17-year-old daughter Madison collapse onto our kitchen stool. Her hands were covered in bandages from 3 days of burns. Her back ached from standing over the stove since Monday morning, and tears of exhaustion mixed with pride streamed down her face as she surveyed 23 perfectly prepared dishes spread across every surface of our kitchen. The text from my father was brutal in its simplicity. Change of plans. Restaurant reservation at Romano's tonight. Adults only. Tell Madison thanks anyway. Madison's face crumbled as she read over my shoulder, and something cold and determined settled deep in my chest. Madison had volunteered to cook our entire family feast on Monday morning, 3 days before my mother's 70th birthday celebration. I remember standing in our doorway, watching her create detailed shopping lists, researching authentic German recipes our grandmother had passed down, and carefully calculating costs using money from her part-time job at Henderson's Bakery downtown. My daughter had always idolized her grandmother Betty. Every Sunday afternoon for years, Madison would sit cross-legged on Betty's kitchen floor, listening to stories about Depression-era cooking and learning techniques that most teenagers never cared to master. When Betty mentioned wanting a real family feast for her milestone birthday, Madison's eyes had lit up with pure determination. "I want to make everything from scratch." "Mom," she had said, her voice filled with the kind of purpose that made my heart swell with pride. "Grandma Betty deserves something special, something that shows how much we love her." Monday morning arrived before dawn. I watched Madison set her alarm for 5 in the morning, then head to the grocery store with her carefully planned lists. She bought ingredients for pot roast with all the traditional sides, hand-rolled pasta with meat sauce, 3 different types of bread, including Betty's favorite rye authentic German strudel homemade pickles, and a dozen other dishes that would feed our expected 23 family members. The physical toll began immediately. Madison's small frame wasn't built for the marathon of commercial-level cooking, but she pushed through every obstacle with teenage determination. Her hands developed blisters from kneading bread dough. Her feet swelled from standing on our tile floor for 12-hour stretches. Burns from oven racks marked her forearms like badges of dedication. I tried to help, but Madison politely declined most assistance. This was her gift to her grandmother, her way of honoring family traditions that seemed to matter less to other relatives with each passing year. She wanted every dish to reflect the love and respect she felt for the woman who had raised me and my brother Derek with such care. Tuesday brought more intensive preparation. Madison started her bread at 4 in the morning, letting dough rise while she prepped vegetables and marinated meats. I watched her carefully measure spices, tasting and adjusting seasoning, with the precision of a professional chef. Her movements showed confidence that surprised me, as if these family recipes were awakening something ancestral in her teenage hands. The house filled with aromas that reminded me of my own childhood, when Betty would spend days preparing holiday meals that brought our scattered family together. Madison was recreating those magical experiences, determined to give her grandmother the same joy Betty had given us for decades. By Tuesday evening, my brother Derek had stopped by unexpectedly. He walked through our kitchen, surveying Madison's elaborate preparation, with an expression I couldn't quite read. His wife Amanda stood behind him, her perfectly manicured nails drumming against our counter as she watched Madison strain homemade pasta. "This seems like a lot of work for a birthday party." Derek commented, his tone carrying that familiar edge of criticism he had perfected over the years. "Madison, you know Grandma Betty won't expect all this fuss." Madison's face flushed, but she continued working. "I want to make it special for her," she replied quietly, not looking up from the strudel dough she was carefully stretching. "It's just dramatic. Amanda added, examining her reflection in our microwave door. Honestly, Madison, you're putting pressure on everyone else to match this level of effort. It's a bit selfish when you think about it. I felt anger rising in my throat, but Madison spoke before I could respond. I'm sorry if it seems like too much, she said, her voice small and uncertain. I just love Grandma Betty, and I wanted to show her. Derek and Amanda exchanged a look I recognized from childhood, the same expression he wore when positioning himself as the reasonable adult, correcting my excessive behavior. They left shortly after, but Amanda lingered in our driveway making a phone call that lasted nearly 20 minutes. Wednesday brought the final push. Madison worked until her hands shook from fatigue, adding finishing touches to dishes that already looked restaurant quality. She hand-painted decorative touches on pastries, arranged garnishes with artistic precision, and created place cards for each expected guest using calligraphy she had taught herself online. The lemon cake was her masterpiece, Betty's absolute favorite dessert that required 6 different steps and ingredients that cost Madison an entire week's wages. She decorated it with fresh flowers from our garden and a message written in elegant script that read, "To our beloved Betty with 70 years of love." By Wednesday evening, Madison could barely stand. Her entire body ached, her hands were wrapped in gauze, and dark circles under her eyes showed the toll of 3 days with minimal sleep. But her smile radiated pure satisfaction as she surveyed her accomplishment. 23 complete meals sat ready in our refrigerator, and on our counters, each dish crafted with love and attention that no restaurant could replicate. That's when Amanda returned this time without Derek. She walked through our kitchen again, but her expression had changed completely. Where Tuesday's visit had shown mild annoyance, Wednesday's inspection revealed something closer to panic. She stared at Madison's beautiful presentation, the abundance of homemade food, and the obvious care that had gone into every detail. "Madison," Amanda said slowly, "this really is impressive work." But something in her voice felt wrong. She made another phone call in her car before driving away, and I noticed her hands gesturing frantically as she spoke to whoever was on the other end. Madison didn't notice Amanda's strange behavior. She was too exhausted, too focused on the final details, too excited about surprising her beloved grandmother with a feast that honored decades of family traditions. I should have recognized the warning signs. I should have remembered Derek's pattern of undermining accomplishments that made him look inadequate by comparison. But I was caught up in Madison's joy, proud of my daughter's dedication, anticipating the happiness this would bring to my mother. The text message arrived just as Madison was putting the final touches on Betty's lemon cake, and in that moment, I realized how naive we had both been. The notification sound on my phone cut through our kitchen like a blade. Madison was carefully adjusting the fresh flowers on Betty's birthday cake, her tongue poking out slightly in concentration as she positioned each petal perfectly. 3 days of relentless work had culminated in this moment, and the pride radiating from my daughter's tired face made my chest tight with emotion. I glanced at the screen expecting a message about pickup times or last-minute requests. Instead, I found words that stopped my heart completely. "Jocelyn, change of plans for tonight. We've decided to celebrate at Romano's restaurant instead. Much easier for everyone. It's adults only, so Madison won't need to worry about coming. Tell her thanks for the effort anyway. Dad." The phone nearly slipped from my hands. I read the message 3 times, each word hitting like physical blows. Madison sensed something wrong and turned from her cake decoration flower, still dusting her exhausted face. "What is it, Mom?" she asked, wiping her hands on the apron that had become her uniform for the past 72 hours. I couldn't speak immediately. How do you destroy a 17-year-old's heart with news this cruel? How do you explain that 3 days of sacrifice and love have been dismissed with a casual text message. Madison read the devastation in my expression and quietly took my phone. I watched her face transform as she processed the words. The light in her eyes dimmed first, then her shoulders sagged as the full impact registered. The confident young woman who had commanded our kitchen for 3 days suddenly became a broken child. "They don't want my food," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the humming refrigerator. "They don't want me there either." The tears started slowly, then became a flood of heartbreak that shook her entire body. Madison sank onto our kitchen stool, surrounded by the fruits of her exhausting labor, and sobbed with the kind of raw pain that only comes from having your heart completely shattered. I held her as she cried my own anger, building with each tremor that ran through her small frame. This wasn't just disappointment about changed plans. This was deliberate cruelty, disguised as family logistics. The timing made it especially vicious, waiting until every dish was completed, every hour invested, every dollar spent. "I worked 3 jobs to buy those ingredients," Madison gasped between sobs. "I turned down Sarah's party invitation. I missed Jake's date invitation. I skipped study group for my AP exams. I wanted everything to be perfect for Grandma Betty." My mind raced through the past 3 days, suddenly seeing Derek and Amanda's visits in a new light. Amanda's panic yesterday wasn't admiration for Madison's work. It was fear that my daughter's thoughtful preparation would overshadow whatever minimal effort they had planned. The cruelty of the adults-only designation hit me like a physical blow. Madison was 17, practically an adult herself, and certainly mature enough for a family birthday celebration. This wasn't about age appropriateness. It was about excluding her, specifically ensuring she couldn't witness the family choosing a restaurant meal over her lovingly prepared feast. I thought about my own childhood, remembering similar moments when Derek's needs took precedence over mine. Our parents had always favored his approach to family events. Flashy gestures that impressed outsiders while missing the deeper meaning of genuine connection. Madison was experiencing the same pattern of dismissal that had shaped my entire relationship with my family. "Maybe they're right," Madison said, her voice hollow with defeat. "Maybe I was being dramatic. Maybe homemade food isn't what people want anymore." "No," I said, firmly, surprising myself with the steel in my voice. "You are not dramatic for showing love through cooking. You are not wrong for wanting to honor your grandmother with family traditions. And you are absolutely not responsible for other people's inability to appreciate genuine effort." Madison looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. "But what do we do now? All this food, all this work, and Grandma Betty will never even see it." I stared at our kitchen, transformed into a showcase of culinary love and dedication. 23 meals sat ready, each one representing hours of careful preparation and genuine affection. The lemon cake alone had cost Madison $40 and 6 hours of meticulous work. That's when my phone buzzed again. This time the caller ID showed Mom, and I answered with trembling fingers. "Jocelyn." Betty's voice sounded confused and upset. "Derek called to tell me about dinner tonight, but I don't understand what happened to Madison's cooking. I've been looking forward to her homemade meal all week. She called me Monday to ask about the old recipes, and I was so excited to taste her versions of our family dishes." My heart stopped. "Mom, what exactly did Derek tell you?" "He said Madison decided she didn't want to cook after all, that she thought a restaurant would be easier. But that doesn't sound like Madison at all. She was so passionate about making everything from scratch when we talked." The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Derek hadn't just changed the plans, he had lied to our mother about Madison's involvement entirely. Betty thought my daughter had given up on cooking, not that her efforts had been dismissed and discarded. "Mom, I said carefully, Madison has been cooking for 3 days straight. She's prepared 23 different dishes, including your favorite lemon cake. Derek never told you the truth about tonight's change. The silence on the other end stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. When Betty finally spoke, her voice carried a pain that matched my own. Jocelyn, are you telling me that my granddaughter spent 3 days preparing my birthday feast, and Derek told me she wasn't interested in cooking? Yes, Mom. And now she's sitting in our kitchen, heartbroken, surrounded by all the food she made with such love for you. Another long pause. This is not what I wanted for my birthday, Betty said quietly. This is not the family celebration I hoped for at all. As I hung up the phone, I realized this moment would define everything that came next. I could accept Derek's manipulation the way I always had, preserving peace at the cost of my daughter's dignity. Or I could finally stand up to the pattern that had shaped decades of family dysfunction. Looking at Madison's tear-stained face, still wearing the apron that represented 3 days of love and sacrifice, I made my choice. Betty's confusion confirmed what I had suspected, but hoped wasn't true. Derek hadn't just changed dinner plans, he had orchestrated an elaborate deception designed to elevate himself while crushing Madison's efforts. The manipulation was so complete that even our mother had been fed lies about her own granddaughter's intentions. Madison, I said, helping her remove the flour-dusted apron that had been her constant companion for 3 days. Your grandmother wants to see your cooking. She never agreed to restaurant dinner. Derek lied to her about everything. Madison's tear-swollen eyes widened with disbelief. Grandma Betty doesn't know about the restaurant plan? She thought you had given up on cooking. Derek told her you decided a restaurant would be easier, that you weren't interested in making homemade food anymore. Fury replaced heartbreak in Madison's expression. At 17, she was old enough to recognize manipulation when it was explained so clearly. The cruelty of Derek's strategy became apparent. He had stolen Madison's gesture of love, while making Betty believe her granddaughter didn't care enough to cook. I started making phone calls, beginning with cousin Sarah, who had always been honest about family dynamics, even when it was uncomfortable. Sarah answered on the second ring, and I could hear embarrassment in her voice before she even spoke. Jocelyn, I was hoping you would call. I feel terrible about tonight's plans. Tell me what you know, Sarah. Derek contacted everyone yesterday saying there had been a family meeting, and you all decided restaurant dining would be more appropriate for Mom's age. He made it sound like the decision was unanimous, like Madison was on board with the change. Did that seem believable to you? Sarah hesitated. Honestly, no. Madison has been talking about cooking this meal for weeks. She called me last Sunday asking about Mom's favorite seasonings. But Derek was very persuasive, and he said anyone who questioned the restaurant plan was putting unnecessary stress on Mom. The pattern was becoming clear. Derek had contacted family members individually, presenting the restaurant change as a group decision, while subtly threatening social consequences for anyone who objected. It was masterful manipulation, disguised as family concern. Sarah, how many people actually wanted the restaurant dinner? I think maybe 5 or 6, mostly Derek's immediate circle. Everyone else was looking forward to Madison's cooking, but nobody wanted to cause family drama by speaking up. I called my Uncle Wayne next, who confirmed the same story with additional disturbing details. Derek had suggested that Madison's cooking was too ambitious for someone her age, that the family shouldn't enable attention-seeking behavior from teenagers. Wayne admitted feeling uncomfortable with the characterization, but staying silent to avoid conflict. Each conversation revealed more layers of Derek's strategy. He had systematically contacted relatives, spinning Madison's loving gesture as adolescent drama, while positioning himself as the mature adult solving family problems. The restaurant dinner wasn't just a change of venue. It was a public statement about whose contributions mattered in our family hierarchy. Madison listened to my side of these conversations with growing understanding and anger. The shy, heartbroken girl was transforming into someone who recognized injustice and wanted to fight back. "What are we going to do, Mom?" she asked, and I heard strength returning to her voice. I looked around our kitchen filled with enough lovingly prepared food to feed our extended family properly. An idea was forming, one that felt both terrifying and absolutely necessary. "We're going to invite everyone Derek excluded to a real birthday celebration for your grandmother. Here tonight, with your cooking as the centerpiece." Madison's face brightened with possibility. "You think people would come?" "I think people would be grateful for the opportunity to honor your grandmother properly and taste the food you've worked so hard to prepare." I started with Betty explaining my plan to host a parallel celebration that honored her actual preferences. Her relief was immediate and complete. "Jocelyn, I would much rather spend my birthday with family in your home, eating Madison's cooking, than sitting in some expensive restaurant feeling like a burden." Next, I called Sarah, who practically shouted with enthusiasm. "Yes, absolutely. I've been feeling sick about this restaurant situation all day. Wayne and I will bring extra chairs and tables. This is exactly what Mom's birthday should be." Uncle Wayne offered to bring his portable barbecue equipment and help with setup. Cousin Ellen volunteered to bring flowers and decorations. Betty's sister Helen, who lived across town, promised to bring her famous dinner rolls and her collection of family photos for a memory display. Word spread quickly through our extended family network. People who had reluctantly accepted Derek's restaurant mandate called to express their relief and excitement about attending a genuine celebration. Many admitted they had been uncomfortable with the sudden change, but felt pressured to comply. The house filled with energy as family members arrived with folding chairs, extra serving dishes, and offers to help. Madison moved through the preparation with renewed purpose, her exhaustion replaced by excitement about finally sharing her labor of love. By early evening, our home was transformed into a proper celebration space. Madison's 23 dishes were arranged beautifully across multiple tables, each one representing her dedication to family traditions and love for her grandmother. The contrast with Derek's sterile restaurant plan couldn't have been more stark. That's when Derek called, and I could hear fury vibrating through his voice before he even finished dialing. "Jocelyn, what exactly do you think you're doing?" "I'm hosting a birthday party for our mother, featuring the meal our daughter prepared with such care." "You're sabotaging the family celebration that I organized. You're confusing Mom and creating unnecessary drama." "Derek, Mom never wanted a restaurant dinner. Madison never gave up on cooking. You lied to everyone about the entire situation." The silence stretched long enough that I thought he might hang up. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a threat that sent chills down my spine. "If you go through with this competing party, I will make sure Mom never speaks to you or Madison again. I have more influence in this family than you realize, and I won't let you undermine my authority." His mask of reasonableness had finally slipped, completely revealing the manipulative control that had shaped our family dynamics for decades. For the first time, I heard Derek's behavior described accurately not as leadership or maturity, but as the desperate need to maintain dominance over people who were becoming independent of his influence. "Derek, the only thing I'm undermining is your ability to hurt my daughter and manipulate our mother." I hung up before he could respond, knowing that the real confrontation was still ahead of us. Friday evening arrived with 2 competing birthday celebrations happening simultaneously across town. Derek's restaurant reservation proceeded as planned at Romano's, but the atmosphere felt forced and hollow according to the reports we received later. Madison nervously made final adjustments to her elaborate spread, while our chosen family members gathered in our living room. 15 people had committed to attending our home celebration, including Betty's elderly sisters, Uncle Wayne's entire family cousin Sarah with her husband and children, and several longtime family friends who had known Betty for decades. The contrast was striking and intentional. Where Derek's restaurant gathering would be limited to those who could afford the expensive entrees and felt comfortable in formal dining environments, our celebration welcomed everyone regardless of financial situation or social status. Madison's homemade food cost a fraction of restaurant prices while providing infinitely more personal meaning. At Romano's, Betty sat quietly at the head of a table surrounded by only 8 people, Derek's immediate circle and a few relatives who felt obligated to maintain family peace. She picked at her expensive ribeye steak with the resignation of someone attending her own funeral, rather than celebrating a milestone birthday. Derek had chosen Romano's specifically because it projected success and sophistication, but the sterile environment stripped away any warmth or authentic connection. The conversation felt stilted, focusing on safe topics like weather and local news, rather than the deeper family bonds that should characterize a 70th birthday celebration. Meanwhile, our house buzzed with genuine warmth and connection. Madison glowed as relatives praised her cooking, comparing her dishes favorably to Betty's own legendary meals from decades past. Uncle Wayne declared her pot roast better than any restaurant in the state, while Cousin Ellen photographed each dish for a family cookbook she was creating. Betty's sister Helen had brought photo albums spanning 7 decades, and stories flowed as naturally as wine, while people enjoyed Madison's carefully prepared feast. This was the kind of celebration Betty had actually hoped for, multi-generational connection centered around food memories and authentic affection. The turning point came when Helen called Betty at Romano's, unable to contain her excitement about Madison's incredible cooking and the beautiful celebration happening in our home. She described the lemon cake that had brought tears to several elderly relatives' eyes, the hand-rolled pasta that reminded everyone of childhood Sunday dinners, and the general atmosphere of joy that marked a proper family gathering. Betty listened to Helen's description while staring at her untouched restaurant dessert, a generic chocolate mousse that bore no resemblance to her actual preferences or family traditions. The contrast between what Derek had chosen for her and what Madison had prepared became impossible to ignore. "Helen," Betty said quietly, "I think I made a mistake tonight." Without explanation to Derek or the other restaurant guests, Betty stood up from the table, left money for her meal, and walked out of Romano's. Derek followed her to the parking lot, demanding explanations, and trying to convince her that leaving would hurt his feelings and embarrass him publicly. "Derek, I want to see what Madison cooked for me," Betty said firmly. "I want to spend my birthday with people who understand what family celebration actually means." Derek arrived at our house 20 minutes later, bursting through the front door without knocking and finding genuine celebration in full swing. Madison was cutting slices of the lemon cake that had taken her 6 hours to perfect, while Betty sat surrounded by relatives who were sharing favorite memories and expressing genuine appreciation for both Madison's efforts and Betty's place in our family history. The sight of his mother genuinely happy and engaged in a way she hadn't been at the restaurant triggered something desperate in Derek. He stood in our living room doorway, surveying the scene with growing panic as he realized his carefully constructed narrative was crumbling in real time. "Mom, you're embarrassing yourself," Derek announced loudly enough to silence all conversation. "This amateur cooking experiment is exactly the kind of stress I was trying to protect you from." Betty looked at her son with an expression I had never seen before. Complete disappointment, mixed with recognition of who he had become. "Derek, this is the most relaxed and happy I've felt all week. Madison's food is extraordinary, and being surrounded by family who actually want to celebrate with me is exactly what I hoped my birthday would be." Jocelyn sabotaged the elegant dinner I planned for you." Derek continued, his voice rising with desperation. "She manipulated you into thinking this chaotic house party was somehow better than a proper restaurant celebration." Amanda stood behind Derek, shifting nervously, as she realized their manipulation was being exposed publicly. Several relatives watched the confrontation with expressions of recognition, finally seeing Derek's behavior clearly without his usual careful presentation. "The only person who was manipulated," Betty said quietly, "was me when you told me Madison didn't want to cook anymore." That's when Amanda cracked under the pressure of being witnessed in her deception. "I suggested the restaurant because I was intimidated by Madison's cooking." She admitted, her carefully maintained composure finally breaking. "I didn't want to look inadequate next to a 17-year-old who could prepare food this beautiful. Derek, I'm sorry, but I pushed you to make this change because I was jealous." The room fell silent as everyone processed Amanda's confession. Years of subtle manipulation and family politics suddenly made sense as people recognized the pattern of Derek and Amanda working together to maintain their position as the successful, sophisticated couple who knew better than everyone else. Uncle Wayne was the first to speak. "Derek, I've been uncomfortable with your controlling behavior for years, but I stayed quiet to keep family peace. Tonight showed me that keeping quiet was wrong." Cousin Sarah nodded in agreement. "You made us all feel guilty for wanting to support Madison's efforts. You convinced us that loving homemade food was somehow immature or inappropriate." The confrontation that Derek had initiated to reassert his authority was instead revealing the extent of his manipulation and the family's growing exhaustion with his behavior. Madison watched from beside her grandmother, understanding for the first time that she wasn't the problem. The adults who couldn't appreciate genuine love and effort were the ones who needed to change. That's when Betty made the announcement that changed everything. "I've been thinking about updating my will," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had finally seen the truth about her family dynamics. "Derek, I know you've been assuming you would inherit the family home, but Madison's behavior tonight has reminded me what it means to truly honor family traditions." Derek's face went pale as the financial implications of his behavior became apparent. His assumption about inheritance had motivated years of positioning himself as Betty's primary caretaker and decision-maker, but his treatment of Madison had revealed his true priorities. The evening ended with Derek and Amanda leaving in humiliated fury, while genuine celebration continued around Madison's beautiful meal. But I knew this confrontation was far from over, and Derek's desperation would likely escalate into something more dangerous than family politics. Saturday morning arrived with deceptive calm. Betty had stayed overnight in our guest room, spending hours after the party sharing cooking techniques and family stories with Madison that bridged 3 generations of women who finally understood each other's worth. I woke early to find them in our kitchen, grandmother teaching granddaughter the subtle differences between various bread-kneading techniques, while reviewing family recipes that had never been written down. The sight of them working together, Betty's weathered hands guiding Madison's young ones, filled me with contentment that felt almost dangerous given what I knew was brewing. Madison seemed transformed by the previous night's success. The confident young woman who had commanded our kitchen for 3 days had returned, but now she carried additional strength that came from seeing her efforts properly valued and appreciated. Extended family members had asked for recipes, requested her catering services for future events, and treated her with the respect she deserved as a skilled cook, rather than dismissed as a dramatic teenager. "Mom, I want to start a family cookbook," Madison announced over breakfast. "Grandma Betty knows so many recipes that will disappear when she's gone, and I want to preserve them for future generations." Betty beamed with pride. "Madison, that would be the most wonderful legacy you could create." These recipes represent decades of family history, and they should be shared with people who will appreciate their significance. The connection between them was exactly what Derek's restaurant plan would have prevented. Instead of enduring an awkward formal dinner where Madison felt excluded and Betty felt isolated from her family's younger generation, they had discovered a shared passion that would continue strengthening their relationship for years to come. But the peace was fragile, and I knew Derek's humiliation would demand some form of retaliation. The first sign of trouble came through social media. Amanda had spent the morning crafting carefully worded posts that painted Derek and herself as victims of family manipulation. Her narrative described Betty as confused and vulnerable Madison, as attention-seeking and dramatic, and me as a jealous sister who had sabotaged an elegant celebration out of spite. The posts were strategically crafted to generate sympathy while avoiding outright lies that could be easily disproved. Amanda shared photos of Romano's elegant dining room, described the stress of family conflict affecting Betty's health, and suggested that homemade cooking was an inappropriate burden to place on elderly relatives. Within hours, Derek was calling individual family members, spinning elaborate stories about the previous night's events that positioned him as the responsible adult trying to protect his aging mother from exploitation. He suggested that I had manipulated Betty's emotions, endangered her health with stressful family drama, and used Madison's cooking as a weapon to undermine his legitimate authority as the eldest son. The speed and sophistication of Derek's response revealed how practiced he was at controlling family narratives after conflicts. He understood exactly which relatives would be susceptible to guilt about family unity, which ones could be intimidated by threats of social consequences, and which ones could be convinced that peace was more important than justice. Madison became increasingly anxious as she overheard my phone conversations with relatives who were suddenly questioning whether the previous night's celebration had been appropriate. The typical teenage response of self-blame kicked in as she wondered if her cooking had somehow caused this family crisis. "Mom, maybe I should apologize to Uncle Derek," she said quietly. "Maybe if I tell him I'm sorry for causing problems, everything will go back to normal." "Madison, you have absolutely nothing to apologize for. You showed love and respect to your grandmother through the most beautiful gesture possible. Derek's anger isn't about your cooking, it's about losing control over family dynamics." But I could see doubt creeping into Madison's expression as Derek's manipulation campaign gained momentum. Several relatives called to suggest that family harmony was more important than any individual celebration, that Madison should be proud of her cooking without needing external validation, and that perhaps the restaurant dinner had been a reasonable compromise after all. The most disturbing call came from cousin Ellen, who had been enthusiastic about our celebration the night before, but was now expressing concerns about Betty's well-being. "Jocelyn Derek is saying that Mom seemed confused and overwhelmed last night. He thinks the stress of changing plans might have been too much for someone her age." "Ellen, you were there. Did Betty seem confused or overwhelmed to you?" A long pause. "No, she seemed happier than I've seen her in months. But Derek is very convincing and he knows Mom's health situation better than the rest of us." The conversation revealed how Derek was weaponizing concerns about Betty's age and health to justify his control over her social life. By positioning himself as the protective son, shielding his vulnerable mother from family stress, he was reframing his manipulation as responsible caregiving. That afternoon, Derek escalated his campaign by contacting Madison's employer at Henderson's Bakery. He called the owner expressing concerns about Madison's emotional stability and suggesting that family stress was affecting her reliability as an employee. The bakery owner, Mr. Henderson, called me directly to ask about the situation. "Mrs. Peterson, your brother seems very concerned about Madison's well-being. He mentioned some kind of family crisis that's affecting her judgment." Mr. Henderson Madison has been nothing but professional and reliable in her work with you. Derek is upset about a family disagreement that has nothing to do with Madison's job performance. I see. Well, Madison is one of our best young employees, but I needed to check since family issues can sometimes affect workplace behavior. The call terrified me because it revealed how far Derek was willing to go in attacking Madison's reputation throughout our community. He was systematically contacting anyone with influence over our lives, spreading doubt about our character and judgment, while positioning himself as the concerned family member, trying to protect everyone from our poor decisions. Madison's part-time job was crucial for her college savings and represented months of building professional relationships based on her reliability and skill. Derek's willingness to jeopardize her employment over a birthday party dispute showed the depth of his desperation to reassert control. That evening, Uncle Wayne called with the most disturbing news yet. Jocelyn Derek filed a complaint with Adult Protective Services, claiming you're manipulating Mom and endangering her health with stressful family drama. APS contacted me for information about Mom's living situation and mental capacity. My heart stopped. Adult Protective Services investigations could result in court-ordered restrictions on Betty's independence, professional evaluation of her decision-making capacity, and formal oversight of her social interactions. Derek was using government authority to punish our resistance to his control. Wayne, what did you tell them? The truth. That Mom seemed sharp-happy and completely capable of making her own decisions about how to spend her birthday. But Jocelyn Derek is telling them that Mom has been showing signs of confusion and that you're taking advantage of her vulnerability. The implications hit me like physical blows. If Derek could convince APS that Betty was cognitively impaired and I was manipulating her, he could gain legal guardianship that would give him complete control over her finances, housing, and social connections. Madison and I could be legally prevented from seeing Betty without supervised visits. As I hung up the phone, I realized that Derek's retaliation had moved far beyond family politics into potential legal consequences that could destroy our relationships permanently. The birthday party dispute had revealed the depth of his need for control and his willingness to use any weapon available to maintain dominance over family dynamics. Madison found me sitting in our kitchen staring at the remaining dishes from her lovingly prepared feast, and immediately recognized the fear in my expression. Mom, what's happening now? I looked at my 17-year-old daughter who had spent 3 days creating something beautiful, only to discover that her love and effort had triggered a war she never could have anticipated. She deserved to understand the full scope of what we were facing. Madison Uncle Derek has escalated this conflict in ways that could separate us from Grandma Betty permanently. We're going to have to be very strong and very smart about how we handle the next phase. But even as I prepared Madison for the coming battle, I had no idea that Derek's desperation would lead him to our front door within hours, bringing a confrontation that would force immediate and permanent resolution to years of family dysfunction. Sunday morning arrived exactly 15 hours after Derek had left our house, in humiliated fury the night before. Madison was helping Betty organize family recipes for the cookbook project, while I prepared breakfast, all of us enjoying the peaceful aftermath of a celebration that had restored authentic family connections. The aggressive pounding on our front door shattered that peace like gunshots. The whole house seemed to shake under the force of whatever was hitting our door, and I knew immediately that Derek's escalation had reached a dangerous new level. Madison instinctively moved closer to Betty, who looked frightened by the violent sound echoing through our home. I approached the front window cautiously and saw Derek standing on our porch with 2 men I didn't recognize, both large and intimidating, in a way that suggested this confrontation was intended to be physically threatening. Jocelyn, open this door right now, Derek shouted his voice, carrying a rage I had never heard before. "You're going to fix this situation and fix it immediately." I cracked the door open while keeping the security chain engaged, trying to project calm despite the fear racing through my system. "Derek, you're frightening Mom and Madison. Whatever you want to discuss can be handled without this aggressive behavior." "What I want," Derek said, stepping closer to the door, "is for you to call every family member you manipulated last night and tell them you were wrong. I want Madison to apologize for causing this family crisis. And I want Mom to understand that her place is with me, not enabling your jealous games." The two men flanking Derek moved closer, clearly intended to intimidate me into compliance. One was Derek's co-worker from his construction job, the other someone I didn't recognize, but whose aggressive posture suggested Derek had described this as a situation requiring physical backup. "Derek, I'm not going to be intimidated into apologizing for hosting a birthday celebration that honored Mom's actual preferences. You humiliated me in front of our entire family." Derek continued, his voice rising with desperation. "You turned my own mother against me using a manipulative teenager's cooking project. This ends now, or I will destroy your reputation in this town permanently." Madison appeared behind me, drawn by the shouting despite my gestures for her to stay in the kitchen. Derek's expression twisted with contempt when he saw my daughter. "Madison, your little performance yesterday has caused serious problems for this family. Grandma Betty is confused and upset because of your selfish need for attention, and now everyone has to deal with the consequences of your drama." Watching a grown man verbally attack my 17-year-old daughter while flanked by intimidating companions triggered something protective in me that overrode all fear. "Derek, you will not speak to my daughter that way. Your anger is with me, not with a teenager whose only crime was showing love to her grandmother." "Her crime," Derek shouted, "is disrupting family harmony with elaborate gestures designed to make everyone else look inadequate. She's manipulative just like you, and I won't let you poison our mother's mind against her own son." That's when our neighbor Carol appeared in our driveway. Carol was a retired police officer who had moved next door 2 years earlier, and she had obviously been watching the confrontation escalate from her kitchen window. "Is there a problem here?" Carol asked in the authoritative voice she had perfected during 25 years of law enforcement. Derek's companions immediately looked uncomfortable, recognizing professional authority when they encountered it. Derek himself seemed to realize that his intimidation tactics were being witnessed by someone with legal knowledge and community connections. "This is a private family matter," Derek said, trying to shift his tone toward reasonableness. "Threatening behavior on someone's private property stops being a private matter when it involves potential assault," Carol replied calmly while pulling out her cell phone. "I'm calling current officers to document this situation." Derek's panic became visible as he realized the legal implications of his behavior. His attempt to pressure me through intimidation was being recorded by a witness who understood exactly what constitutes criminal threatening. "Jocelyn, just tell Mom you're sorry for confusing her, and this can all be resolved peacefully," Derek said, desperation making his voice crack. "Derek, the only confusion here is your belief that you have the right to control how our family celebrates important occasions." That's when Carol's phone call connected, and I heard her clearly describing the situation to a police dispatcher. 3 men, aggressively confronting a woman and her teenage daughter, refusing to leave private property when asked, behavior consistent with intimidation and potential assault. Derek's companions were already backing toward their truck when the police sirens became audible in the distance. Derek himself seemed frozen between fight and flight responses, finally understanding that his escalation had crossed legal boundaries. The responding officers arrived within 5 minutes, and their investigation revealed details that completely undermined Derek's position. His breath showed alcohol consumption despite the early hour, and a routine check discovered outstanding warrants for unpaid traffic violations and court costs from previous incidents. More damaging was his companion's immediate eagerness to distance themselves from the situation. Both men described Derek as increasingly agitated over the past day, talking obsessively about family betrayal and expressing threats about teaching lessons to people who challenged his authority. As officers questioned Derek about his behavior, Madison and Betty watched from our living room window with expressions of shock and recognition. They were witnessing the mask completely removed from someone who had controlled family dynamics through subtle manipulation for decades. But the most devastating revelation came during the officers' investigation of Derek's background. A routine check of his financial records revealed unauthorized withdrawals from Betty's bank accounts, totaling thousands of dollars over the past 6 months, transactions that Derek had justified as helping Mom manage her money, but which constituted elder financial abuse under state law. Betty learned about the stolen money while sitting in our living room, and her expression shifted from disappointment to complete disillusionment as she realized the extent of Derek's exploitation. "He's been stealing from me while claiming to protect my best interests," she said quietly, her voice carrying the pain of betrayal that went far beyond birthday party disputes. Amanda arrived just as Derek was being arrested, and her reaction revealed the final piece of the manipulation puzzle. Instead of supporting her husband, she immediately began negotiating with officers for immunity in exchange for information about Derek's financial abuse and emotional manipulation of family members. The woman who had pressured Derek to sabotage Madison's celebration was now describing him as controlling and financially abusive, willing to sacrifice him to protect herself from legal consequences. Derek's breakdown was complete as he realized that his escalation had exposed years of financial crimes while alienating everyone who might have supported him. His attempt to reassert control through intimidation had instead triggered investigations that would result in criminal charges and restitution requirements. As the police cars drove away with Derek in custody, our house fell into stunned silence. Madison, Betty, and I sat together, processing the rapid transformation from family birthday dispute to criminal investigation, finally understanding the true scope of the dysfunction we had been enabling for years. The door that Derek had pounded so aggressively had become symbolic of the barrier we had finally established against his manipulation and abuse. For the first time in decades, our family could begin healing without the constant pressure of his need to control and diminish everyone else's contributions. But I knew the legal process was just beginning, and Derek's financial crimes would require months of investigation and restitution that would affect our entire extended family. 3 months later, I stood in our kitchen watching Madison teach her first community cooking class to a group of elderly residents from the local senior center. Betty sat at our island serving as assistant instructor while sharing stories about each recipe's family history. The transformation from that devastating text message to this moment of healing felt like emerging from a long nightmare into sunlight. Derek had pleaded guilty to elder financial abuse intimidation and several related charges that resulted in 18 months of supervised probation, mandatory restitution of $12,000 to Betty's accounts, and a court-ordered restraining order that prohibited any contact with our family. The legal resolution felt like vindication, but the emotional healing required much more time and effort. The financial investigation revealed the full scope of Derek's exploitation. He had been systematically withdrawing money from Betty's savings for 8 months, using forged signatures and manipulated authorizations to fund his lifestyle while presenting himself as her responsible caretaker. His assumption about inheriting the family home had motivated years of positioning himself as Betty's primary supporter, but he had been stealing her independence while claiming to protect it. Amanda divorced Derek during his probation process, admitting to our extended family that his controlling behavior had escalated far beyond what she was willing to enable. Her confession revealed years of manipulation that extended into their marriage, and she expressed genuine remorse for participating in the campaign against Madison's birthday celebration. I was so intimidated by Madison's talents and Derek's need to compete with everyone, Amanda told me during a private conversation weeks after his arrest. I convinced myself that undermining a 17-year-old's cooking was somehow justified because it made our contribution seem more sophisticated. The community response surprised all of us. Word spread about Madison's cooking abilities and the family conflict that had nearly prevented her grandmother from experiencing them. Local restaurants offered her internship opportunities, the senior center requested regular cooking demonstrations, and several families hired her to cater intimate celebrations that honored authentic family traditions rather than impressive appearances. Henderson's Bakery promoted Madison to assistant manager and featured her homemade items in their display cases, with signs reading Madison's Family Recipes. Her income doubled, and her college savings fund grew substantially as community members specifically requested her baked goods and catering services. Betty thrived in the stable, respectful environment that emerged after Derek's removal from our family dynamics. She moved into a comfortable apartment closer to our house, maintained her financial independence with proper oversight from legitimate professionals, and became a regular presence in our daily lives without the stress of navigating Derek's controlling behavior. The family cookbook project evolved into something far more meaningful than Madison had originally planned. Extended family members contributed recipes, stories, and historical photos that created a comprehensive record of 4 generations of traditions. Betty's detailed instructions and Madison's precise documentation ensured that future family members would have access to culinary knowledge that might otherwise have disappeared. Uncle Wayne became the unofficial family historian, documenting not just recipes, but also the dysfunction that had nearly destroyed our connections to each other. His honest assessment of Derek's behavior helped other relatives understand how enabling manipulation in the name of family peace had actually enabled abuse. "We all knew Derek was controlling," Wayne admitted during one family gathering, "but we didn't recognize that our silence was allowing him to escalate into criminal behavior." Madison's birthday celebration forced us to see the truth about what our family dynamics had become. Cousin Sarah organized monthly family gatherings centered around Madison's cooking events that restored the authentic connection and mutual support that had been missing for years. These celebrations became models for how families could honor traditions without allowing individual members to dominate or manipulate group dynamics. The most profound change was in Madison herself. The confident young woman who had spent 3 days preparing a feast of love had emerged stronger and more self-assured after surviving Derek's attempts to diminish her worth. She understood now that her gifts were valuable, regardless of other people's ability to appreciate them, and that standing up to manipulation was necessary, even when it caused temporary conflict. "Mom, I learned something important about family loyalty," Madison told me while preparing for another community cooking class. "Real loyalty means protecting people from abuse, not protecting abusers from consequences." Betty's perspective on family relationships had been permanently altered by experiencing the contrast between Derek's manipulation and Madison's genuine affection. She became an advocate for elderly people facing financial abuse, speaking at community events about recognizing the warning signs of exploitation by family members. "Madison showed me what it means to be truly valued," Betty said during one of her presentations. Her 3 days of cooking represented pure love, while Derek's years of help were actually stealing my independence. The difference between genuine care and controlling behavior became clear when I saw them side by side. The legal restitution process required Derek to repay Betty through monthly installments that would continue for years, a constant reminder of the consequences of exploiting family relationships for personal gain. His supervised probation included mandatory counseling about healthy family dynamics and financial responsibility. Though his participation seemed grudging rather than genuinely transformative. Extended family members gradually acknowledged their roles in enabling Derek's behavior through decades of avoiding conflict rather than addressing obvious problems. The collective recognition of how family dysfunction had been normalized created opportunities for healthier communication patterns going forward. Madison's story spread beyond our immediate community as an example of how young people could honor family traditions while standing up to manipulation and abuse. She was invited to speak at school assemblies about healthy family relationships and received scholarship offers from culinary programs that valued her combination of technical skills and emotional maturity. The birthday celebration that Derek had tried to sabotage became an annual tradition honoring Betty with Madison's cooking as the centerpiece. Each year, the gathering grew larger as family, friends, and community members requested inclusion in a celebration that represented authentic love rather than obligation or appearance. Looking back, that devastating text message had been the catalyst for transformation our family desperately needed, but had been avoiding for years. Derek's cruelty to Madison had finally forced confrontation with patterns of manipulation that had shaped decades of family interactions, creating opportunities for healing that might never have emerged otherwise. Madison continued developing her culinary skills while maintaining her academic excellence, understanding now that her talents were gifts to be shared rather than weapons for others to use against her. She learned to recognize manipulation early and respond with confidence rather than self-doubt, skills that would serve her throughout her adult relationships. Betty lived her final years surrounded by family members who valued her wisdom and experience, rather than viewing her as an asset to be controlled or a burden to be managed. She died peacefully 4 years later, leaving her home to Madison and her savings distributed among family members who had shown genuine care rather than calculated investment. The most lasting lesson from our experience was understanding that protecting authentic family relationships sometimes requires ending toxic ones, and that love expressed through actions like Madison's 3 days of cooking is infinitely more valuable than love claimed through words while pursuing selfish agendas. As I watched Madison demonstrate bread-making techniques to her latest group of elderly students with Betty's photos and recipes displayed proudly around our kitchen, I felt profound gratitude for the courage she had shown in standing up to injustice and the strength our family had discovered in supporting authentic love over convenient peace. Derek's attempt to diminish Madison's worth had instead revealed the true value of family members who honored each other's gifts, while his own manipulation and abuse had led to the isolation and legal consequences he had tried to impose on us. The young woman who had spent 3 days cooking with love now spent her time teaching others to express care through food, creating connections that honored tradition, while building new relationships based on mutual respect and genuine affection. Have you ever had to choose between keeping family peace and protecting someone you love from unfair treatment? I'd love to hear about times when you had to stand up for what was right, even when it caused conflict with people close to you. Please share your stories in the comments below, and don't forget to like this video if Madison's journey inspired you to think about your own family dynamics. Subscribe to hear more stories about finding strength in difficult family situations, and share this with anyone who might need encouragement to stand up for themselves or someone they care about. Sometimes the most loving thing we can do is refuse to enable behavior that hurts the people we're meant to protect. Thank you for listening to Madison's story, and I hope it reminds you that your efforts to show love and respect are valuable, regardless of how others choose to respond. Here's to families built on authentic connection rather than manipulation, and to young people like Madison who teach the rest of us what genuine love looks like in action.